The Pythia, commonly known as the Oracle of Delphi, was the name of any priestess throughout the history of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, located on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, beneath the Castalian spring. The Oracle of Delphi was always a woman. The Pythia was widely credited for her prophecies inspired by Apollo. The Delphic oracle was established in the 8th century BC, although it may have been present in some form in late Mycenaean times, from 1400 BC, and was abandoned, and there is evidence that Apollo took over the shrine from an earlier dedication to Gaia. The last recorded response was given about 395 AD. To Emperor Theodosius I, after he had ordered pagan temples to cease operation. During this period, the Delphic oracle was the most prestigious and authoritative oracle among the Greeks. The oracle is one of the best documented religious institutions of the classical Greeks. Authors who mentioned the oracle include Aeschylus, Aristotle, Clement of Alexandria, Diodorus, Diogenes, Euripides, Herodotus, Julian, Justin, Livy, Lucan, Nepos, Ovid, Pausanias, Pindar, Plato, Plutarch, Sophocles, Strabo, Thucydides and Xenophon. The name Pythia derived from Pytha, which in myth was the original name of Delphi. The Greeks derived this place name from the verb pythine, which refers to the decomposition of the body of the monstrous Python after he was slain by Apollo. Pythia was the house of snakes. The usual theory has been that the Pythia delivered oracles in a frenzied state induced by vapors rising from a chasm in the rock, and that she spoke gibberish which priests interpreted as the enigmatic prophecies preserved in Greek literature. The idea that the Pythia spoke gibberish which was interpreted by the priests and turned into poetic iambic pentameter has been challenged by scholars such as Joseph Fontaine-Rose and Lisa Maurizio, who argue that the ancient sources uniformly represent the Pythia speaking intelligibly, and giving prophecies in her own voice. Origins of the oracle. The 8th century reformulation of the oracle at Delphi as a shrine to Apollo seems associated with the rise in importance of the city of Corinth and the importance of sites in the Corinthian Gulf. The earliest account of the origin of the Delphic oracle is provided in the Homeric hymn to Delphic Apollo, which recent scholarship dates within a narrow range, 580–570 BC. It describes in detail how Apollo chose his first priests, whom he selected in their swift ship. They were Cretans from Mino's city of Knossos, who were voyaging to sandy Pylos. But Apollo, who had Delphinios as one of his cult epithets, leapt into the ship in the form of a dolphin. Dolphin Apollo revealed himself to the terrified Cretans, and bade them follow him up to the place where you will have rich offerings. The Cretans danced in time and followed, singing i.e. paeon, like the paeans of the Cretans in whose breasts the divine muse has placed honey voice singing. Paeon seems to have been the name by which Apollo was known in Mycenaean times. G.L. Huxley observes, if the hymn to Apollo conveys a historical message, it is above all that there were once Cretan priests at Delphi. Robin Lane Fox notes that Cretan bronzes are found at Delphi from the 8th century onwards, and Cretan sculptures are dedicated as late as California 620–600 BC. Dedications at the site cannot establish the identity of its priesthood, he observes. But for once we have an explicit text to set beside the archaeological evidence, an early visitor to these dells of Parnassus. At the end of the 8th century, it was Hesiod, who was shown the Omphalos. There are also many later stories of the origins of the Delphic oracle. One late explanation, which is first related by the 1st century BC writer Diodorus Siculus, tells of a goat herder named Cortes, who noticed one day that one of his goats, who fell into a crack in the earth, was behaving strangely. On entering the chasm, he found himself filled with a divine presence and could see outside of the present into the past and the future. Excited by his discovery, he shared it with nearby villages. Many started visiting the site to experience the convulsions and inspirational trances, though some were said to disappear into the cleft due to their frenzied state. A shrine was erected at the site, where people began worshipping in the Late Bronze Age. By 1600 BC, the villagers chose a single young woman as the liaison for the divine inspirations. Eventually she spoke on behalf of gods. According to earlier myths, the office of the oracle was initially possessed by the goddesses Themis and Phoebe, and the site was initially sacred to Gaia. Subsequently it was believed to be sacred to Poseidon, the earth-shaker, god of earthquakes. During the Greek Dark Age, from the 11th to the 9th century BC, a new god of prophecy, Apollo, allegedly seized the temple and expelled the twin guardian serpents of Gaia, whose bodies he wrapped around the caduceus. Later myths stated that Phoebe or Themis had given the site to Apollo, rationalizing its seizure by priests of the new god, but presumably having to retain the priestesses of the original oracle because of the long tradition. Apparently Poseidon was mollified by the gift of a new site in Troeisen. Diodorus also explained how, initially, the Pythia was an appropriately clad young virgin, for great emphasis was placed on the oracle's chastity and purity to be reserved for union with the god Apollo. But one consultant notes, Eschocrates the Thessalian, having arrived at the shrine and beheld the virgin who uttered the oracle, became enamored of her because of her beauty, carried her away and violated her, and that the Delphians, because of this deplorable occurrence, passed a law that in the future a virgin should no longer prophesy, but that an elderly woman of 50 would declare the oracles and that she would be dressed in the costume of a virgin, as a sort of reminder of the prophetess of olden times. The scholar Martin Litchfield West writes that the Pythia shows many traits of shamanistic practices, likely inherited or influenced from Central Asian practices, although there is no evidence of any Central Asian association at this time. He cites the Pythia sitting in a cauldron on a tripod while making her prophecies in an ecstatic trance state, like shamans, and her unintelligible utterings. The tripod was perforated with holes, and as she inhaled the vapors, her figure would seem to enlarge, her hair stood on end, her complexion changed, her heart panted, her bosom swelled and her voice became seemingly more than human. Organization of the oracle. Personnel. Since the first operation of the Oracle of Delphi Temple, it was believed that the god lived within a laurel and gave oracles for the future with the rustling of the leaves. It was also said that the art of divination had been taught to the god by the three-winged sisters of Parnassus, the Thraii. At the time when Apollo was grazing his cattle there, the Thraii used to have a Cheiromantoion in that area in the past, and it is possible that such was the first oracle of Delphi, i.e., using the lot. 3 oracles had successively operated in Delphi, the Onion using Ecoemesi, the Cheiromantoion and finally, the Apollonian, with the laurel. But ever since the introduction of the cult of Dionysus at Delphi, the god that brought his fans into ecstasy and madness, the Delphic god gave oracles through Pythia, who also fell into a trance under the influence of vapors and fumes coming from the opening, the inner sanctum of the oracle. Pythia sat on top of a tall gilded tripod that stood above the opening. In the old days, Pythia was a virgin, young girl, but ever since Eschocrates from Thessaly fell in love, kidnapped and violated a young and beautiful Pythia, a woman older than 50 years old was chosen, but still a virgin who dressed and wore jewelry to resemble to a young maiden girl. According to tradition, Phemino was the first Pythia. Though little is known of how the priestess was chosen, the Pythia was probably selected, at the death of her predecessor, from amongst a guild of priestesses of the temple. These women were all natives of Delphi and were required to have had a sober life and be of good character. Although some were married, upon assuming their role as the Pythia, the priestesses ceased all family responsibilities, marital relations, and individual identity. In the heyday of the oracle, the Pythia may have been a woman chosen from an influential family, well educated in geography, politics, history, philosophy, and the arts. During later periods, however, uneducated peasant women were chosen for the role, which may explain why the poetic pentameter or hexameter prophecies of the early period later were made only in prose. Often the priestess's answers to questions would be put into hexameter by a priest. The archaeologist John Hale reports that the Pythia was a noble of aristocratic family, sometimes a peasant, sometimes rich, sometimes poor, sometimes old, sometimes young, sometimes a very lettered and educated woman to whom somebody like the high priest and the philosopher Plutarch would dedicate essays. Other times who could not write her own name. So it seems to have been aptitude rather than any ascribed status that made these women eligible to be Pythias and speak for the god. The job of a priestess, especially the Pythia, was a respectable career for Greek women. Priestesses enjoyed many liberties and rewards for their societal position, such as freedom from taxation, the right to own property and attend public events, a salary and housing provided by the state, a wide range of duties depending on their affiliation, and often gold crowns. During the main period of the oracle's popularity, as many as 3 women served as Pythia, another vestige of the triad, with 2 taking turns in giving prophecy and another kept in reserve. Only one day of the month could the priestess be consulted. Plutarch said that the Pythia's life was shortened through the service of Apollo. The sessions were said to be exhausting. At the end of each period the Pythia would be like a runner after a race or a dancer after an ecstatic dance, which may have had a physical effect on the health of the Pythia. Several other officials served the oracle in addition to the Pythia. After 200 BC at any given time there were 2 priests of Apollo, who were in charge of the entire sanctuary. Plutarch, who served as a priest during the late 1st century and early 2nd century CE, gives us the most information about the organization of the oracle at that time. Before 200 BC, while the temple was dedicated to Apollo, there was probably only one priest of Apollo. Priests were chosen from among the main citizens of Delphi, and were appointed for life. In addition to overseeing the oracle, priests would also conduct sacrifices at other festivals of Apollo, and had charge of the Pythian games. Earlier arrangements, before the temple became dedicated to Apollo, are not documented. The other officials associated with the oracle are less well known. These are the Hoshai and the Prophetae. Prophetess is the origin of the English word prophet, but a better translation of the Greek word might be one who speaks on behalf of another person. The Prophetae are referred to in literary sources, but their function is unclear. It has been suggested that they interpreted the Pythia's prophecies, or even reformatted her utterances into verse. But it has also been argued that the term prophetess is a generic reference to any cult officials of the sanctuary, including the Pythia. There were 5 Hoshai, whose responsibilities are unknown, but may have been involved in some manner with the operation of the oracle. Oracular procedure. In the traditions associated with Apollo, the oracle only gave prophecies during the 9 warmest days of each year. During winter months, Apollo was said to have deserted his temple, his place being taken by his divine half-brother Dionysus, whose tomb was also within the temple. It is not known whether the oracle participated with the Dionysian rites of the Manads or Thyades in the Chlorican cave on Mount Parnassus, although Plutarch informs us that his friend Clea was both a priestess to Apollo and to the secret rites of Dionysus. The male priests seem to have had their own ceremonies to the dying and resurrecting god. Apollo was said to return at the beginning of spring, on the 7th day of the month of Bysios, his birthday. This would reiterate the absences of the great goddess Demeter in winter also, which would have been a part of the earliest traditions. Once a month, thereafter, the oracle would undergo purification rites, including fasting. to ceremonially prepare the Pythia for communications with the divine. On the 7th day of each month, she would bathe in the Castalian spring, then would drink the holier waters of the Casseties, which flowed closer to the temple, where a naiad possessing magical powers was said to live. Euripides described this ritual purification ceremony, starting first with the priest Ion dancing on the highest point of Mount Parnassus, going about his duties within the temple, and sprinkling the temple floor with holy water. The purification ceremonies always were performed on the 7th day of the month, which was sacred to and associated with the god Apollo. Carved into the entrance of the temple were two phrases, which seem to have played an important part in the later temple ritual: Gamma Nu Theta Iota Sigma Epsilon Alpha Upsilon Tau Nu and Mu Eta Delta Nu Gamma Alpha Nu, and an enigmatic E. According to Plutarch's essay on the meaning of the E at Delphi, the only literary source for the inscription, there have been various interpretations of this letter. It has been interpreted as the first letter of Gamma Gamma Upsilon Alpha Pi Alpha Rho Alpha Delta Tau Alpha equals make a pledge and mischief is nigh. In ancient times, the origin of these phrases was attributed to one or more of the 7 sages of Greece. The oracle then descended into the Adyton and mounted her tripod seat, holding laurel leaves and a dish of Casseties spring water into which she gazed. Nearby was the omphalos, which was flanked by 2 solid gold eagles representing the authority of Zeus, and the cleft from which emerged the sacred pneuma. Consultants, carrying laurel branches sacred to Apollo, approached the temple along the winding upward course of the sacred way, bringing an animal for sacrifice in the forecourt of the temple, and a monetary fee. Petitioners drew lots to determine the order of admission, but representatives of a city-state or those who brought larger donations to Apollo were secured a higher place in line. The sacrificial animal, often a goat as representation of the site's discovery, was first showered with water and observed to ensure that it shivered from the hooves upward, an auspicious sign that the oracular reading could proceed. Upon sacrifice, the animal's organs, particularly its liver, were examined to ensure the signs were favorable. Plutarch describes the events of one session in which the omens were ill-favored, but the oracle was consulted nonetheless. The priests proceeded to receive the prophecy, but the result was a hysterical, uncontrollable reaction from the priestess that resulted in her death a few days later. At times when the Pythia was not available, consultants could obtain guidance by asking simple yes or no questions to the priests. A response was returned through the tossing of colored beans, one color designating yes, another no. Little else is known of this practice. Between 535 and 615 of the oracles of Delphi are known to have survived since classical times, of which over half are said to be accurate historically. Cicero noted no expedition was undertaken, no colony sent out, and no affair of any distinguished individuals went on without the sanction of the oracle. The early fathers of the Christian Church could think of no explanation for the oracles but that demons were allowed to assist him to spread idolatry, so that the need for a savior would be more evident. The experience of supplicants in antiquity, the people who went to the oracle to ask for advice, were known as consultants, literally, those who seek counsel. It would appear that the supplicant to the oracle would undergo a 4-stage process, typical of shamanic journeys. Step 1. Journey to Delphi. Supplicants were motivated by some need to undertake the long and sometimes arduous journey to come to Delphi in order to consult the oracle. This journey was motivated by an awareness of the existence of the oracle, the growing motivation on the part of the individual or group to undertake the journey, and the gathering of information about the oracle is providing answers to important questions. Step 2. Preparation of the supplicant. Supplicants were interviewed in preparation of their presentation to the oracle, by the priests in attendance. The genuine cases were sorted and the supplicant had to go through rituals involving the framing of their questions. the presentation of gifts to the oracle, and a procession along the sacred way carrying laurel leaves to visit the temple, symbolic of the journey they had made. Step 3. Visit to the oracle. The supplicant would then be led into the temple to visit the Aditon, put his question to the Pythia, receive his answer and depart. The degree of preparation already undergone would mean that the supplicant was already in a very aroused and meditative state, similar to the shamanic journey elaborated on in the article. Step 4. Return home. Oracles were meant to give advice to shape future action that was meant to be implemented by the supplicant, or by those that had sponsored the supplicant to visit the oracle. The validity of the oracular utterance was confirmed by the consequences of the application of the oracle to the lives of those people who sought oracular guidance.